Thank you for that worship. Thank you for that worship. And yeah, as I said this morning, it was just a great time to walk into Sudbury Prison and just worship and watching a prison actually revive and a chaplaincy department. And I mentioned earlier about faith, the different people in the faith groups there. I met a woman once, and she was a Hindu, and she was a minister at HMP Sudbury, and I used to sit and watch her, and I used to go, "Do you know Jesus?" And there was nothing in this woman's actions, in the way that she walked, in the way that she talked, in the way that she served people, that convinced me that she didn't know Jesus. And every time I asked the question, she said no. And it always had a profound effect on me about this moral compass that's being put inside us. Where's that moral compass come from? Because me as a born-again Christian and her as a Hindu minister, we had very, very different thinkings. But where we met on the middle was what we believed good was. What we actually believed good was. And it's quite strange that sometimes the people that impact you the most in life aren't always Christians. And sometimes the people that impact us the most in life don't actually believe what we believe. And I always call them good people. That's a good person, that is. Because I definitely know what a bad person looks like, because I used to be one. And sometimes I might still be one. So I'm going to speak on why do bad things happen to good people? And I thought about that, and I have thought about it a couple of times. And one of the things that I'd like to think is, why does good things happen to bad people? Because sometimes it just feels a little bit unfair. Your life starts changing, you start going to church, you start being a better husband, you start being a better son, you start going to work on time, you start doing all the things that you're meant to be doing, and life just keeps hitting you. And you think, that's not fair. It's just not fair at all. I want to tell a story that I don't tell very often, but I feel that it's, for some reason, that it's apt today. And I was in a children's home called Heron Cross in Stoke-on-Trent. And Heron Cross Children's Home, I was there when I was 9 years old. And the first night of me being in there, I was put in with a young man that was a Down syndrome. And he was gay, and he was sexually attacking children. And I was 9, and I was put in his room, so I can let you think whatever you think. But 4 members of staff used to have to control this 14-year-old boy. Moving forward, I was 18 years old, and I walked into my solicitor's one day, and there was a list on the wall, and it says, have you been in these children's homes? And there was 4 or 5 children's homes on that list. And I said to my solicitor, what about Heron Cross? And they said, what about Heron Cross? I said, well, I was abused in Heron Cross. So they went and investigated Heron Cross, and there was 440 odd abuse cases. There was 40-something children that committed suicide since the children's homes was closed. And about 240, maybe 250 came forward and put statements in. But what they realised, these children's homes that were all in the homes of doing the abuse, it was this children's home and the person that ran that home, a guy called. And he was like in control of it all. And it went on for years, this systematic abuse in some of the children's homes. And it became the second biggest abuse scandal in the children's home in the UK. But it wasn't on the board when I walked into the solicitors. No one knew about it, or no one was willing to say anything about it. And my story is my story, and one of the things I really, really remember was a guy called Mark Little. And he wasn't little, he was about 6'7". And he was an amazing man. I always remember him being a very, very gentle, kind man. And some of the things that I remember him was that he had a Mark 1 Escort estate. Can you remember him? And he used to take me and a couple of other children to school from the children's home. And I guarantee every day it broke down. We were always bumping it. We were always pushing it. And I just remember this 9-year-old that when I was in this Mark Little's company, that everything was good and I was safe. And I always wanted to be around this man, and this man is what I call a good man, because there was other stuff going on in the children's home that wasn't good. And I didn't deserve it. No child deserves some of the stuff that I went through. And without going into great detail, it's wrong. It's abhorrently wrong. It should never happen. But I always remember this Mark Little, and I didn't really know much about Mark because, at the age of 10, I went and lived in Essex, and I went and lived with my mother and my stepfather, and I went and lived 4 years of a childhood that I didn't need to endure before I came back up to Stoke-on-Trent and went back into care again. Moving forward, I spoke in a church one day, Lonton Central Hall Methodist Church, big church, and I was speaking, just sharing my life story, and it was a Sunday morning. There was probably 100 people there, and there was this man just sitting there. And as I talked about my story and I talked about my childhood, I mentioned Heron Cross Children's Home, and I watched this guy just transfixed, looking at me, just looking. And it didn't distract me, but I knew something was happening. And I spoke for about 20, 30 minutes, and we had a time of worship and praise. And at the end of it, this guy kind of, I don't know if you've noticed, I'm very good at moving around without actually speaking to anyone. It's something I've been able to do all my life. The guy said, you were there at the front and then you were at the back. And I think some of that's from my childhood, just being able to hide in corners if I needed to and stuff like that. And normally after I speak at any event, I normally just kind of move off into a corner and do my own little thing. I'm quite extroverted when I'm speaking and doing my day-to-day, but I'm quite an introvert. I need my own little space. But I knew that this bloke was going to try to touch base with me, and I knew it was right for him to touch base. And he came up to me, and he was crying. And he was telling me his version of Heron Cross. The guy that ran Heron Cross, who's died now, a guy called Brian, who was evidently involved in a lot of abuse with children. And evidently, they reckon this guy had interaction with 10,000 children a week. He was the president of the Brownies, the president of the Gymnasts. He was in charge of now if you looked at his life, safeguarding would just be saying no every single step of his life. But it was very different in the 80s. This guy, called Alan, I'll call him, he told me that when all this abuse scandal came out against Brian was his friend, and he defended Brian. And not only did he defend his Brian, him and his wife defended Brian, and the close circle of people defended Brian. And they went on for years believing that Brian did nothing wrong. And he convinced his circle that he didn't do anything wrong. Alan was a good man. And when I heard what I was speaking on this afternoon, why do bad things happen to good people? I believe that Alan's intention to support Brian were good. I genuinely believe that. But over time, he realised that his tensions were not good, and his tensions were perhaps wrong, and it came out that Heron Cross was this bad place, and this guy called Brian led it. But I believe that God is a restoring God, and I believe that God has a love for all his children, whether it's the Hindu lady I met at Sudbury, because morally I could see her heart was amazing. Probably better than most of us in this room, the way she went round and did her work. I believe that Alan went in his mess and his chaos and his stress and his denial, and he looked at himself and he wasn't quite sure why that he supported this man called Brian, even though this guy called Brian was not a good man. I believe that Alan's heart was good, and I believe that God was inside him and he was morally good. I got to tell Alan that he was forgiven that day, and he carried a burden for 15 years of his life, maybe 20 years of his life. And he believed that it was his fault that Brian kind of looked like he got away with a lot of this stuff at the end. And he believed that it was wrong that him and his wife actually stood and defended him. And I said to him, I said, look, mate, I said, I just want you to know that I have no issue with you. I totally think you're amazing. And how proud that you should be of yourself, that you actually felt that you could come and speak to me and talk to me about this. And I let him know that even though that you're a good person, sometimes bad things happen to us, and what you've gone through doesn't feel great, that God is in it. Because his love for Brian and his love for the whole situation around that, and it was a bad time for Stoke-on-Trent. His love was born out of his faith. Him trying to just walk alongside someone. And I've always been really impacted by Alan, and I've always been impacted by the Hindu lady, because their hearts are very good. But she used to get a lot of abuse in that prison. A lot of abuse. Lads racially abusing her, lads pulling her faith apart. Even Christian men would do it. But there was something inside her that kept being good. And there was something inside Alan that was good. And he believed what he was doing was a good thing. And I remember him telling me the story of Mark Little. Mark Little was an amazing social worker at the time. And Mark Little had an inkling that there was abuse going on in this children's home. And Mark Little did something that was really good. He moved that child to another children's home. That child was me. And he didn't realise that the other children's home was abusing children as well. And I heard a story that Mark had a mental breakdown and he felt guilt and all the other stuff that he went through. And I've never met him. But I believed he was good. And I believed that what he tried to do was a good thing. And he should have never not questioned himself for doing it. Alan tried to do a good thing. The amazing lady I met in Sudbury was a good lady doing good stuff. And I remember defending her time and time again. You need to leave her alone. You need to stop. I believe that there's a goodness inside us, guys, that we have not only emotional right and a moral right, and as men of God, a Christian right to carry on doing. I believe that sometimes what we get back for, it's not going to be good. But that doesn't mean that you should not do it. Because if we don't step out and defend people and love people, if we don't step out and try to rescue people and take them to places of safety, if we don't actually step out and serve people with a good heart, what does this world look like? I know what bad looks like. I came from a very bad upbringing. And I do a thing called the 96-hour challenge every year. It's crazy. I don't know why I do it, but I always say I'm never going to do it ever again. I invented it about 5 years ago. This is basically the 96. You can join me. All of you can join me if you want. You basically get a bike or a walk or a canoe or all three, and you spend 96 hours travelling from one point to the next point, which is normally a couple hundred miles, with no food and no money. And that's what you do. And we do it every year. We raise loads of money for people at Christmas, people that are vulnerable, they need money for food over Christmas. And we did it one year, and we did the 96-hour challenge, and we did the Cheshire Circle on mountain bikes. And we're doing about 45, 50 miles a day. And it was just coming out of COVID. Remember when no one was allowed to exercise, and all of a sudden we're all exercisers? Because it's the way we got to interact, and everyone started using the local park or the local reservoir or the local canal. Never seen a canal in your life before, but every so often, I've got a brand new bike, come on me. And it's because you needed to get out and you need to interact. Well, we did the 96-hour challenge on the back of that. And we got out and So I remember the first day, there was me, Charlie, Darren. Darren Bardo was the same guy that led me to the Lord, by the way. He came to walk. because he went back to prison 8 times after he led me to the Lord. 8 times, and every time he got out, he went back to prison. And then he came back to walk when I set it up many years later, and it changed his life. Isn't that amazing that you can share the gospel, someone can get saved, and then that person could be part of your future to help you change your life? I find that. And Darren ended up working at Walk for 4 or 5 years as a staff member as well. So anyway, we're out on this bike ride, and the first day I said, right guys, we've all got £1.98 in our hands, which is what basically a homeless person has roughly to live on each day. Here's what we could do. We could all put our £1.98 and add it to the money that we're raising. And we all agreed, let's do it. It's all praying, and we're off we go. No money, no tents, no nothing. It's just you, your bike, your mate, and faith. And I remember us just pedaling into this little hamlet village kind of place. And we pulled up, and I said to Charlie, I said, right, Charlie, what do you want? And he was as Scottish as they come. And in his broad Scottish accent, he's like, I'd like a cup of tea. I'm like, well, let's pray for a cup of tea. So we're all praying for this cup of tea. 4 men on 4 bikes in the middle of nowhere, wet and cold, thinking, oh, why are we doing this? And we prayed for a cup of tea, and we went down into this place. We saw this garage, and I could see this lady, and she was you could see that she was in a 3rd stage of life, we should say. And I pulled up on this forecourt, and we knocked on the door and says, hey, can we get a cup of tea? And she went, yeah, let me just ask the owner. And the owner's under the bonnet fixing a car. Let me have it. We got chatting to her. And this is another good person. And I always seem to have the ability to get people to talk if they don't want to talk and reveal stuff about themselves that they don't always want to reveal themselves. And I believe that's just because between us we're just patient and kind, and we leave space for people to talk. And the lads are outside laughing and joking because they're getting a cup of tea, and I'm inside chatting to this lady. And this lady told me she's 70 years old, and she started to cry. And I'm going, you okay? I'm thinking, it's COVID and we're all isolated. And she told me she was a foster parent. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. And she said all her life she's been able to foster children and do the whole journey with them for as long as they need to be with her. But at this time, there was a little boy that she had who was about 13, 14. She couldn't cope with him because she was too old. Physically, she couldn't cope. It was too much for her. And she's telling me this story, and she said, I'm going to have to let him go back. And it was heartbreaking to see her heartbreaking, because that's not why she was being good. She was being good because she was giving someone a loving home. So I'm like, I said, can I just stop you there? And I shouted over 3 lads, Big Lee Braston, 6'3", about 28 stone then he was, massive bloke. Darren Barsley, told you about him, led me to the Lord, frontline gang member, really violent, sort of guy that pulls petrol on your feet, and that kind of guy. And then tells everyone about Jesus 20 years later. Amazing story, the transformation of this guy. And young Charlie, a guy from Scotland that's been in addiction, in and out of addiction, and just, just trying his best to follow Christ. And then there was myself that, I've been had 18 sets of foster parents for us 6 and 3 children's homes, and I've been in 27 prisons, and life's been a little bit of a roller coaster, to be honest. I've had people try and kill me and been kidnapped and all the stuff that, someone like me goes through. I've even been, Staffordshire Police even tried to ban me from my own city in my 20s. And we're there on a bike with no money, just the 4 of us, in the middle of nowhere, just coming out of COVID, speaking to a good woman, a good person. And she felt what she was going through was not good when it was bad. Just like Alan felt that what he went through was not good when it was bad. Just like the Hindu minister felt that some of the stuff that was coming against her was not good, it was bad. And I said, can I just tell you a story? We're all ex-foster children. But we want you to know that we love you. We think you're amazing. And even though that little boy will be moved on, he will always remember how amazing you are. See, I remember Mark Little being good. See, I remember Alan's heart sharing the burden of the 15, 20 years. I remember looking at his heart and looking at a man that tried to do good. I remember the lady that blew my head off more than the Christian ministers in the prison because she was more Christ-like than anyone I ever met. And because she was who she was, this good person, the stuff that she used to get thrown at her was not good. The decision Mark made, thinking he was saving a child or children, it kind of backfired and it felt like it wasn't good. And then we had this lady that had been in service for 50 years as a foster parent, had scores and scores of children in a home for short emergency time, for weeks and months on end, sometimes a year or two. And all of a sudden, right at the end, she felt that she failed as a foster mum. And 4 blokes turned up on a mountain bike, all as good looking as me, blagging a cup of tea from her. And do you know what we did? We just prayed with her and just let her know that she's loved. Do you know what I did with Alan? I just prayed with him and let him know that he's loved. Do you know if I ever see Mark Little, I'm just going to pray with him and let him know that he's loved. Do you know what I did with the Hindu minister? I used to just sit with her and just say, hey, should we have a chat? And find out the things and let her know that she's loved. See, sometimes we have to go through a bit of stuff. All of us. We can blame God, great. We can blame ourselves, we can blame each other. But I genuinely believe that the things that we go through also help us become who we're meant to be. I genuinely believe that. So I've been in children's homes. What do you think I'm building at the moment? Children's homes. I'm on my 3rd one. I've been rescued and put into care in emergency bed placements. I have 3 emergency bed placement children's homes now. I came out of prison time and time again as a young adult and failed and went back into prison. I'm now a CEO of a charity called Walk that helps average 80 men a year. We have 45 residents. Most of them have just come out of prison. I was addicted to drugs. And my addiction was about 3.5 years, crack cocaine, led me into doing a series of armed robberies. I ended up getting a life sentence from it. That's where I met God. We now run the only detox centre in Stoke-on-Trent that has a 68% detox success rate, which is by far, without a doubt, the highest in the UK. We're just very good at feeding people and loving them. A bit like you lot today, we all get fed. We all feel a bit better, don't we, after some food. I was a child that went to every single school and got expelled from every single school that I ever went to, and I was told that I was thick and I was stupid. I've just brought a police station, me and my 2 friends, and we built a school for children with learning difficulties. So there's 45 children that go to that school right now. The Heron Cross Children's Home, I brought a pub around the corner called The Railway, me and my 2 friends, and we turned it into a recovery home for men coming out of addiction and men coming out of prison. Quite apt, this pub, because many years ago I used to be a prolific person that used to put dodgy money everywhere. You know the dodgy notes? Have you ever had one? You told me you're all good lads. I mean, and I used to have pubs everywhere that I used to just drop an envelope of fake money off. And this was one of the pubs. I have found a way of correcting my past by doing good things. I have found a way that the world has told me something about me and done bad things to me. And instead of me sitting in that continuously, I've been able to receive Christ in my heart, forgive people around me, and then turn that whole experience from bad and turn it back into good. And there's a beautiful scripture. It says that you did not choose me, I chose you. And it says that you've been appointed and anointed. It's amazing. You've been appointed. There's a time on your life. And you've been anointed, equipped. It depends which translation that you look at. So you've been given the tools. Sometimes we use the wrong tools. As Ash said, we cut our fingers, and I used to always whack my finger with a hammer and to go and bear fruit. What kind of fruit? See, what happened if I stayed the angry person that I was, coming out of children's homes, going into the prison system, having to be segregated, staying in GOD cells, being stripped, being in a straitjacket? I got sectioned at 21. What about if I stayed that person? What about the 15, 16, 17-year-old that was extremely angry but extremely calculated, very logistical thinking? Because I had to always work out where the bad people was, so I solved problems very quickly as a child. And then the adults grabbed hold of me, and they manipulated and controlled me, and then they started using my skill set in the criminal world. What about if I stayed that person? See, I could have stayed a bad person, bad things happening to me. Trying to be a good person, bad things happening to me. Being a bad person, being good things happening to me. And I could have done that cycle. But what I did in the cell one night, early hours in the morning, 2009, in September, I accepted Jesus in my heart. And by accepting Jesus in my heart, my journey stopped here and it started here. And I was on this new path, this new track. But as I moved forward, the only toolbox that I had was from over here. So I started to be good. And I still had to go through things that were bad. I was in prison as a born-again Christian, getting mocked and ridiculed. I was the governor's best mate and a snitch and a grass and all the other stuff because I started to do good. The moment I stepped over here, everyone loved me again. They accepted me because I was like them. But I was doing good. I gave my life to Christ. I changed my outlook on life. The world was still an unforgiving place. I noticed just how unforgiving the world could be when I started to be good. Because when you're being bad, you don't notice it as much. So I get myself on this journey, and instead of being the abused child, the person that went into care, the person that failed coming out of prison, I shared my heart with God. What's going to happen to these men coming out of prison, and what's going to happen to me? And I got a vision in a cell one night, cell 23. And it was like a matrix moment where God just downloaded me a vision. 10 years after coming out of prison, we're here today. And it's amazing, isn't it, that the guy that's been in 25 placements within the care system, that now I'm building children's homes. I find that. The police station that we brought was the same police station that had me under surveillance and also had me under... they weren't very good police at the time, I'll just have to say it as it is. Yeah, we had quite a disagreement in a cell for 4 hours. But instead of me staying in that moment and being angry at those people and staying in that moment and being angry at the people that abused me, what I did is I turned that and I did something about it, and I created a place where other people could have a chance of changing their life. And I did it because I took this stuff here and I let Jesus come through it and turn the way I looked at the world and started to do something about it, so other people didn't have to go through what I went through. The Bible's very clear. It says nothing is wasted. Nothing. Absolutely nothing is wasted. Why is it that I can sit and talk to a man about abuse and my sexuality when it was all messed up and it doesn't feel awkward? Because I went through it. And because I went through those things, I now have an authority to talk about those things. See, when I was in addiction and I felt lost and I felt hopeless and I felt like my life was going to end and I felt suicidal and all the other stuff that I went through, when I meet someone in addiction, I can talk about it and it doesn't feel awkward because I have the authority and I also have the experience to talk about it. I'm not saying what I went through was right. I'm not saying what I went through was from God. I didn't say that. I'm not saying that God was angry at me. I'm saying that the world is not always a great place and I went through some stuff, but I've chosen to follow Christ as best I can, just like all of us can. And my moral compass, I hope, is with my faith compass, which then gives me a physical action of doing, because that's the bit that we need to do, because the next part of that scripture, it says, and pray together and give thanks. I've changed my life, I'm born again, okay? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with that? Because before those last two parts of John 15, verse 16, and the first two parts, it says, to bear fruit that is everlasting. I've got a date at 3:30 with my daughter. She's travelling from Durham to Leeds. I'm going to spend a few. I love my daughter. She's amazing. And I always go out and have a date with her. We go shopping and we eat food. And I remember when I came out of prison, my daughter was very angry. She had a right to be angry. Her dad had been in prison for 7.5 years. And she come out fighting. Oh, she came out fighting. She's boxing now. I'm really proud of her. Fast hands. And she's training to box. And And I said to her, the thing is those days, when are you going to have a relationship with your dad? Not everyone else's version of the relationship with your dad. When are you going to get to know me? And because I've changed and I've started to have a better relationship with my daughter, her life's journey has changed onto a different track. She went from a girl that was very suicidal, mental health problems, struggling with, self-harm, and her sexuality was all over the place, not quite sure her identity, to now she's 22, she's training to be a beautician, she got her own home with a boyfriend, she has a dog, she's kind of doing normal stuff, she's training to box, she's got her first competition, and she's travelling on the train to meet her dad for a date at 3:30. That's the fruit that's everlasting. That's because I realised that I've been chosen. Even though that when I was trying to be good and do good and follow Christ as best I can, that the world was still hitting me with some stuff. I've been accused of everything you can think of. I'm an ex-offender. It's easy to accuse someone like me of stuff. I've been through it quite a lot as a criminal and as a Christian, as an abused child and a man of God, as a person that was in addiction and now a person that's set free. The bad stuff keeps coming. It's what I choose to do with the bad stuff. See, I believe that I'm a king. I believe that I'm a son of God. I believe that I'm a child of God. I believe that when I walk into a place that things are already done and all I need to do is turn up. And I believe that when I walk in with that gentleness and that actual clarity of knowing that God's chosen me to do something, a new thing, that things happen. I also believe that the fruit that now that I'm dealing with is everlasting. Because men at Walk Ministries, their life is changing and their children's life is changing. Their mums and dads are being restored to them. Their children have now got fathers. They are now working in the community. One of our lads became a probation officer this year. 5 or 6 of our lads work in children's homes. In the last year, we've had 8, 9, maybe 10 lads that have become support workers. 3 or 4 years ago, they were drug addicts, heroin addicts, thieves, scoundrels, scumbags, whatever the world wanted to call them. And let me tell you, when they started to do good, the world was still bad against them. And I always say the same thing. It's not up for you to convince the people around you that you've changed your life. It's up for them to accept it. You just need to keep walking it out and following Christ as best you can. And I call it plodding on. Just plod on. I love a plodder. I do. Just plod on. Just do today. You don't need this big, big plan. Do you know what you actually really need to do? Is you need to accept John 15, verse 16, that you've been chosen. What have I been chosen for? To go out and bear fruit. I'm glad I met Alan. And the moment I met him and I spoke to Alan and I spoke to him and I talked to him and I said that he's been forgiven and I had no malice against him, I watched everything lift off him. I'm glad I met that woman with 3 ex-offenders, all in the different shades of sorting their lives out, with no money in the pocket. Can you imagine the 4 of us turning up in the middle of nowhere, posh little village? Must have looked like we had 4 stolen bikes. We're all different shades of colour. We all had different accents. It was brilliant. It must have looked. But we turned up and gave that woman a message. And we let her know that you're a good person. And that little boy will always remember you being a good person. Don't stop being good just because bad things happen to you. That's not a reason. Perhaps you need to think of the way you do things. Perhaps you need to have more of a plan. See, sometimes if you try to do 10 things, you're not going to do the one thing right. Running a ministry like Walk and seeing the success and the growth, people looking in, they think, oh, it's amazing. And it is amazing. And sometimes we forget how amazing it is because we're in the middle of it. Next Saturday, we're doing a thing called Walking with Walk. We're all going to Rudyard Lake. So there'll be 40, 50 people all walking together and just chatting, laughing and joking and getting to know some of the men and some of the staff. And I always get marvelled at how people see us when they meet us. The bit that they don't always see is the stuff that we've gone through to get to today. See, my reaction as the CEO, or the person that leads this amazing thing, is very different to the way I used to react 8, 9 years ago, 7 years ago, even 5 years ago. My outlook on life looks slightly different than what it did 2 or 3 years ago. The things that I believe that I'm meant to be doing in our city don't look exactly the same as what they did 4 or 5 years ago. Because some of the stuff that I've gone through, by building the stuff that I believe that God's put in my heart, has helped me get better and more refined at what I'm doing. See, sometimes you go through bad things that are challenging when you're a good person to shape you. So you can become that better version of you. If I stayed angry at the world and I stayed doing the things that I was doing, perhaps I would have never gave my life in that cell with Darren. Perhaps I would have never picked the Bible up. But when I did pick the Bible up and I started to do good, the world was still very unfair. And I feel that the world can be very unfair. We just need to look at the news. Just look at Facebook. I've got a love-hate thing with social media. I don't know whether I should be on it or I shouldn't be on it. But I employ men of God to keep being good. Because if you're not good, there's only the opposite of good. That's bad. And if we don't stand on the front line and try to do good things and try to build the world in a better place and create safer places for people to grow in, I'd hate to think what the world would look like. I definitely know what it looked like in my childhood. I definitely know what it looked like when I first entered the secure system and the prison system. It looks nothing like today. I definitely know when I had interaction with the bad side of the police force. Now, it's quite apt that Staffordshire Police did at the time, Stoke-on-Trent Police time, to get me out of Stoke-on-Trent. I just moved anyway, couldn't be bothered. Couldn't be bothered with the drama. But now I actually work with the police. Kind of find that. I believe that we have a mantle as men to be as good as we can. And I believe that when the world and people are bad against us, I believe that we need to take on board that those people aren't having their very best day today. Because if they were having the best day, they would probably be good to you as well. And sometimes if we just look past Alan's anger and all the stuff that he was going through, and we actually realise that he was carrying a burden that wasn't good in his life, and he had to meet someone like me to let him know that he was loved, I think sometimes we need to be a little bit more forgiving. I think sometimes that if we carry the badness in our life and we hold it in our hands, I believe that the only fruit that's in Galatians, and there's 23 of them, and it doesn't look good, the fruit. And it's witchcraft and sexual morality and anger and all the other stuff. It's just not good. It's like, is that it? It's a big bag of mushy, smelly fruit. And right at the end, it basically says this: you can give all that up, you can accept the peace of Christ, and you can have this fruit. I genuinely believe that the way that we handle with bad things happening to good people is by the peace of Christ. And that peace surpasses all understanding. That is the fruit that we're now peddling. That is the fruit that we're now living. That's the eternal fruit. When my daughter turned up in my life and she was angry, she had a right to be angry. And I had to learn to be a new father. This father that was patient. Well, I didn't used to be patient. It took me 7.5 years in a prison cell to learn some patience. I didn't used to be tolerant. I've been through a lot of stuff in life to understand how to be tolerant with people. I didn't used to be happy. I know what sadness looks like, so I know the things that I don't need to do to be sad. I know how to make sure that there's happy things in my life that brings the happiness and joy. And it's peace. And I can only apologise that we're going to go through some stuff. But let me tell you this much. You need to get your armour going, guys. Please don't think you're going to go out and do good stuff in the world and believe that bad stuff ain't going to happen. I genuinely believe that sometimes that when you put your head against the mantle of life and you actually stick it up there and you start defending your faith and you start defending people and you start defending the broken, the lost and the weak and all the other stuff, I believe that you're in the firing line. And I believe the only way you're going to actually go through that is through the peace of Christ. So yeah, what a lovely lady that was that day. And she made us a cracking cup of tea. She did. And do you know what? And she was dead thankful. And I believe that that last part of John 15, verse 16, it says, and give thanks. Are we thankful? Because sometimes we don't show our thanks, do we? By the way we react. And I think if we can just, as men, we can actually sit and list the things that we are really thankful for. And work out that, as Jesus says, you didn't choose me, I chose you. We'll actually take that revelation on in our hearts, that you've actually been chosen for what? And you come up with this big list of bad fruits. Yeah, but what about all these things that I've been through? And you have a right to be angry, by the way. You have a right to voice your heart and your thinking. You have a right. My daughter had a right. Alan had a right to come to me and share what he went through. That lady that day had a right to express the loss and the anguish that she was going through. But do we stay in that right, or do we pick this right up? And this right tells me that you've been appointed. Your name's out there in the book of life. When God sees you, he sees Christ. It's very clear. He sees Christ. And he sees this most beautiful thing, and it's called love. Because it says in Genesis that we were made in his image. And the God I know, the Father I know, is absolutely pure love. And if we can just get a glimpse of that, that we are loved so much, that we've been chosen to actually fight the good fight with Christ, to get alongside him in the kingdom that he built, to help navigate through it like he's showing us how to navigate through it, and we can champion on the other people that need to be in a safe haven. So why don't we get our mess? Who's got a mess? Anyone got a mess? Let's stand up then. Let's stand up. And you don't need to shout your mess out. You know what your mess is. We've all got it, haven't we? I'm still working through my mess. Do you feel that you're ready Some of you guys are born again, some of you guys have recommitted your life to Christ, some of you guys are on a journey, not quite sure, and that's okay. And that is your journey, and it's a personal journey. Do you think you're ready to just step over here? And if you are, just step over. Just physically step. Just actually physically step. See, sometimes, guys, when you say you're going to do it and you're thinking about doing it and you're emotionally wanting to do it, you have to actually do it. See, sometimes when you sit here and you talk about all this bad stuff that you've gone through, sometimes it's you who has to do something about it. Sometimes you're expecting the world to change around you when you need to change so you can change the world around you. It's really important that you understand that. I am a man of God. Say it, I am a man of God. I have been chosen. I have been appointed, anointed, to go and bear good fruit that is everlasting. And I am going to pray with my brother and give thanks. Sometimes, guys, the things you need to do is the activation of your faith. Do we pray with our brother? Not many hands up. Not many hands up. Do we actually take real time to actually step into that place and move over there and get alongside each other and pray through it? Do we actually give thanks to God? Because I cannot stand here as a man of God and tell you that you are not going to go through bad things. I'm sorry. You need to get someone else to come and tell you. I can definitely tell you this, that you've been appointed and that our Lord Jesus Christ has equipped you to go and change the world around you. And he's going to use all that mess, all that hurt, all that anger, all that strife that you've ever been through, all that fear and that denial and all the stuff that you're not quite sure about. And there's going to be an opportunity time in your life that you are going to turn that and you're going to be able to step over here and release it in a peaceful way and change the world around you. Amen. Who knows the Father's Prayer? Yeah? No one? Who knows our Father? Yeah? You want to do it? Say, our Father.
I'll give you all.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks, guys.